back from the home.
We are live. We are live, and this is Senate Finance. It is April 22nd, the day after the Boston Marathon.
Did the Red Sox win?
I don't know, and I haven't heard if my niece made it through the
41.
marathon.
It's 41.
But-
Must have. No news, it's good news.
That's right. Okay, we're gonna take a look at H96, which is an act relating to increasing the monetary threshold for certificates of need. And well, we haven't got Jen, who is the drafter, but Nolan can give us the fiscal analysis. You need a certificate of need to build a healthcare facility. The threshold has been in place forever, and monetary things have changed. I know when birthing centers came through, there was a concern that they were required to get a certificate of need. And the cost was prohibitive because they had, at least at this point in time, to be small, one or two person kinds of facilities.
I think we're going to give a certificate to need to any medical installation that could provide itself fully staffed upon opening.
That would be good. Okay, so Nolan, I know one of the questions that came up was certificates of need go through the Green Mountain Care Board. And if we cut the certificates, will that impede their ability to do others? And I don't know if you cover it.
I can talk a little bit and then Jen can fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
For the record, no line, what we joined fiscal office. Yeah, so as the chair mentioned, certificate of needs, there's a threshold for what, when you're doing a capital project or, and Jen can talk more specifically. When it's a certain threshold of cost to build or expenditure for it, it needs to be a need. Well, I'll let Janice talk a little bit more about what the thresholds are, but what the bill does, it proposes to increase the monetary threshold so that so let's say it's $1 million, it would go up a little bit. Again, I don't let Jen talk about the numbers because I don't recall what they are. And what that would do is it would reduce the number of certificate of need requirement the board needs. This was actually their ask, their recommendation. And it's probably a combination of what they're seeing is it really necessary to the level of workload they're doing. But the reason it's here is because there's fees involved in it. And there's the fees. So under 18 VSA 9441, the board charges a fee for the filing of CON applications. The fee is calculated at a rate of 0.125% of the project costs. Fees range from a minimum of $250, regardless of the project cost, to a maximum of $20,000. All the fees are deposited to the Green Mountain Care Board regulatory and administrative fund. Now, over the past 7 years, the Green Mountain Care Board has collected approximately $50,000 per year on average in fees related to certificate of need applications. They estimate that this bill would reduce the number of certificate of needs, therefore, could reduce their revenues by as much as $20,000 per year, which according to them only accounts for about 0.2% of their overall budget. That said, the board feels this loss can be absorbed within their budget, and that aim to decrease in the certificate of need reviews would allow resources to be deployed elsewhere within the organization. So again, they're the ones who brought it to us. They're saying that yes, it would reduce the revenues by 20,000, but it would free up some of their resources because they're feeling a bit understaffed, and it would allow them to deploy it elsewhere. And remember, they get a lot of other revenue from bill back and other stuff, so they could potentially offset some of that through other work for which they get reimbursements for.
This covers medical equipment.
The capital projects, buildings, medical equipment. Again, I'll defer to Jen to talk more specifically about what falls under this need. There she is.
There she is.
Perfect time.
So if you don't have any questions for me, we can go to Jen
Okay.
and talk about what the thresholds are. Most people have
Any
questions.
questions? Okay,
All right. Choose the most for each.
Thank you. Sorry, she's in. Okay, let's see.
Snapshot.
Brad. It's Joan.
yeah, I request a major rewrite before they're.
I drove by the place yesterday, and my bunkers, they're all 0% finance, I'm like, I should be working. Of the
So
truck.
while we're waiting, I'm looking for any witnesses you'd like to hear. I'm trying to go through the education bill chunk by chunk. We have a lot of people that want to talk about the division of the non-homestead area of the taxing scheme, so the classification actually. I haven't had anyone. We're gonna have John Gray give us a refresher in Brigham. Because we're gonna be looking at that ability to raise over and over this foundation formula. I'd also like to hear any thoughts on the foundation formula. Do we want to rework how that's set up? I know there's some talk about reworking the weights and how that would work. And we can't get Tammy Colby, but we couldn't get her this week, and we're starting to run out of time, so we may end up being on our own. This is school vacation week for some people. So, but I'm gonna think, see if I can find out. If I don't have time today, because I'm at a chairs meeting at 4:30. I will try and just, I've got time tomorrow.
One thing I'd like to hear a little bit more about, and this is related to the weights, but also the broader form of this special education, because putting special education as a weight is a new thing.
Okay.
So I'd like to hear from, and maybe some of our witnesses today will address it, but who is the head of the special education tasks? There's somebody who's sort of the head of all special educators.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Speak on behalf of
used to
special
be,
educators.
Was it Betty?
Long gray hair.
Yes.
Wow.
What was her name?
And her
Probably
was the
not.
wife of our committee assistant.
Yeah, she's not in that position anymore,
No, they're
but it's that,
retired.
It's that position. There's somebody
Okay,
who
we'll
can
find it.
speak on behalf
Okay.
of special educators that would be nice to
Yeah.
hear from, to see
Yeah.
if special education practices, or, you know, how the whole thing would be impacted.
Okay. Jen,
Yes,
we're back.
thank you for your patience.
And we're going to CON.
Yes, Jen Carvey from the Office of Legislative Counsel, and I've just sent Charlotte, there was a strike all amendment from Senate Health and Welfare, so that's what I'm going to be walking you through.
Oops, okay.
Okay, I will figure. So it is as I said, it's a strike all. This is H-96, an act relating to increasing the monetary thresholds for certificates of need. And under existing law, there are kind of two sets of monetary thresholds that trigger a certificate of need requirement, one for healthcare facilities other than hospital and a separate one for hospitals. In this bill, those are aligned, so they're actually being combined together. So you'll see we've struck out the other than a hospital, healthcare facility, other than a hospital, and then coming up in subsection B, we'll just repeal all of subsection B. So under existing laws, separate thresholds, this one, same threshold, healthcare facility of any sort shall not develop or have developed on its behalf a new healthcare project without issuance of a certificate of need by the board being the Green Mountain Care Board. And then the definition of a new healthcare project, a small change that may or may not have an actual impact in practice, which is under existing law, a new healthcare project includes the following with a list. As we know, includes means, and under our statutes means includes, but is not limited to. So this gets rid of the includes and says means any of the following. So it goes from being potentially an inexhaustive list to an exhaustive list, closed viewers. So now the only things that can mean a new healthcare project are first, the construction, development, purchase, renovation, or other establishment of a healthcare facility or capital expenditure by or on behalf of capital of a healthcare facility for which the capital cost exceeds, and this is increasing the threshold from 1.5 million, I think 3 million for hospitals, to 10 million for all. So, well, shorthand referred to as construction, but any kind of construction or capital expenditures that's greater than $10 million. Change from one licensing period, this is not changing, but a change from one licensing period to the next of licensed beds through addition or conversion or relocation from one physical facility or site to another. Also, no change in the offering of any home health service or transfer or conveyance of more than 50% ownership in a healthcare facility other than a hospital or nursing home. Next is the purchase, lease, or other comparable arrangement of a single piece of diagnostic and therapeutic equipment that costs, and under existing law, it's 1 million, this would increase to $5 million. And then it's leaving in unchanged some language saying you basically can't split up a logical purchase in smaller parts in order to make it under the threshold. Not changing that. Number 5 is the offering of a healthcare service or technology having an annual operating expense that exceeds, and this is increasing from $500,000 to $3 million for either of the next 2 budgeted fiscal years, if the service or technology was not offered or employed within the previous 3 years. And then we're striking this separate provision on the construction, development, purchase, lease, or other establishment of an ambulatory surgical center because it just falls into this general healthcare facility as defined for the check. And then there's the separate standalone section, subsection that would go away for hospitals and what a new healthcare project means specifically for hospitals. And some of the financial thresholds were the same and some were different. And now everybody's the same. And then in subsection C, it's increasing the threshold under which a conceptual development phase certificate of need is required for a very large project. And so in this case, if it's supposed to be under existing law, more than a $30 million, and this would increase that to a $50 million project, then first there needs to be a conceptual development phase certificate of need, and then later a regular certificate of need. And so just making, again, a conforming change to reflect that change from 30 million to 50 million. And then under existing law, there's a provision allowing expenditures to be made in preparation for getting that conceptual development phase certificate of need. And under existing law, I guess those expenditures are allowed as long as they don't exceed 1.5 million for non-hospitals and 3 million for hospitals. And this would just be 10 million for everybody. All healthcare facilities. No more changes in D or E. Section 2 is adding to the exclusions. Under existing law, there are exclusions from the certificate of need requirement, even if something would otherwise meet the requirements to trigger a certificate of need jurisdiction in section 1. There are some exclusions from the entire subchapter. Under existing law, one of those exclusions is for a routine replacement of non-medical equipment and fixtures, including, for instance, boilers, refrigeration units, kitchen equipment, heating and cooling units, and similar items. This adds on to that also fully depreciated medical equipment. Medical equipment that is fully depreciated and is just being replaced because it has reached the end of its useful life does not need a certificate of need. That goes along with the non-medical equipment and fixtures, regardless of their remaining useful life. And then 2 new exclusions. One is for emergency and non-emergency ground ambulance services, affiliated agencies, and equipment and supplies used by emergency medical personnel. And the other is an exclusion for the offering of a healthcare service or the construction, development, purchase, renovation, or other establishment of a healthcare facility that is owned or operated by the state of Vermont or is funded in whole or in substantial part by a contract or grant awarded by the state of Vermont Provided, however, that the state agency that's sponsoring the project or awarding the contract or grant must inform the Green Mountain Care Board prior to commencing the project or within 30 days following the execution of the contract or grant. So if it's been already authorized by the state in another way, it doesn't need a certificate of need, but there would be a notice requirement to Green Mountain Care Board. And then finally, the effective date takes effect on passage and applies to all new healthcare projects initiated on or after that date. If there's already a project underway under a certificate of need, and there has been one or more persons who've been granted interested party status, which is a specific process in the CON subchapter, then they're going to keep playing under the same rules, finish out that certificate of need. The jurisdictional thresholds and exclusions in place when the application was filed would continue to apply until a final decision is made on the application. But if there's been an application in process on the date and nobody has been granted interested party status, then the applicant can withdraw the application and just go ahead with their project. That is it.
I'm remembering back, but this came in the early 2000s or even earlier.
Certificate of need.
Yeah.
It was in the 90s.
In the 90s.
I think my understanding is it started as a federal requirement, and then, or federal, encouragement to have a certificate of need program. And then the feds stopped specifically encouraging it. States are in various stages of requiring it.
Because when I was first on this committee at Bishka, before healthcare went over to the Green Mountain Care Board, there was a lot of concern, that hospitals would build and that the cost of the building would be placed on the rates. And wanted to make sure that building was necessary. And also that if you bought in those days, MRIs and other equipment were the state of the art, and a concern that once you bought one, the inclination would be to use it, because once you paid for it, it was all gravy and it was more expensive than doing an X-ray. So we wanted to make sure that the state had some control over, and we do, I think it's MRIs that are still in a truck and go around the state, whatever you go through a big tube. But several hospitals share that diagnostic equipment, and it is in a tractor trailer. You could see it up here at CVH. I know it goes to Fanny Allen. I was up there with a kid once with a broken finger, and it was a blizzard and the truck was missing. And a lot of people sitting in X-ray waiting for it. So we still have that. Every hospital doesn't get one of these very expensive machines, and I'm assuming that is part of this whole certificate of need, is maintaining some control.
Right, it's looking, some of the criteria include that the Green Mountain Care Board needs to review, include things like being consistent with the appropriate allocation of healthcare resources as identified in the health resource allocation plan. So yes, keeping, being aware of different services available in different parts of the state and avoiding duplication.
Thank you, Chair Cummings. I would just encourage the body to support this bill. There are states in the country that don't have CON laws, and they have lower healthcare costs than we have. This is an opportunity for us to really align ourselves with a greater transformation that we're working on in all of the various healthcare committees. And it was a recommendation by the Oliver Wyman report, and it's very important for the likes of birth centers and other smaller facilities that don't necessarily generate a lot of money, but are really important to keeping costs down in the state. So I think it's a great bill, and I hope we can support it.
And it is here because the change. And I don't think we've raised the amounts since the early two
They do
thousands.
get their indexed,
They
so
do
I
get-
think some of them have been raised and they're also indexed, based on consumer price index rate of inflation. Board has the authority to, and I understand does adjust them.
And that will stay in place because that process will. stay
Yes,
in
and that
place.
part does not change.
That's right, that was a should discussion. Right.
Exactly.
Does the bill make it automatic that they change, or does it
No.
still keep the GMBTs?
It still keeps,
Discretion.
yeah, it still keeps it discretionary. My understanding is that the
We
board.
went from
Has
may or
exercised that.
must, and the thing was should,
Yeah.
and told that was not
And
legally a
I
good
said that
term.
wasn't, yes, I said that wasn't used.
Should, so I think it's at may.
They get moved
But
to it May.
It is here because
But they do.
in raising the amount that needs to go and in excluding some of the lower cost or different facilities, we could lower the money that is going to the Green Mountain Care Board that they use to operate the program. Their testimony in health and welfare, since they sent this to us, was they would make it up and they thought it would not be a problem.
We're expecting that fewer CON applications to review because new projects which trigger jurisdiction.
Be less work. Substantial problem.
I just wonder, again, I've always had suspicions about fee controls such as that being done here as to whether or not there comes a point that the legislature should just step back and take a look at the whole issue related to this, and particularly at those states that don't have these kinds of fees. What would our healthcare situation look like if we abolish those fees altogether? I've always had the fear that these fees discourage improvements, discourage new building, new construction, new ideas, new thoughts, new ways of doing things, and unduly delay them in order to protect institutions that are here that we complain about charging high fees in the first place. And I'm not sure the last time we just taken a step back saying, do we need this at all? And really look at the issue of those fees and whether or not what would happen and in the event that we abolish those kinds of fees altogether and had an open market.
I know we had some of that discussion when the same-day surgical center
Yeah, I remember that.
was opening,
Yeah.
and I think with the eye surgery clinic
Mhm.
in Chittenden County.
Right.
And they're
It
there.
goes back a few years though.
Oh, yeah.
Both of those projects, certainly the eye center.
I think health and welfare would welcome that discussion as we go through.
Well, it sounds like that's what this bill does. It puts everybody on the same, so the hospitals and other healthcare facilities would have the same thresholds. Before there was a difference in thresholds. And it's not just about the fees, it's about the process of sort of
Yeah, they would have to-
justifying a new.
They would
healthcare
have
facility.
uniform fees, but the people who are already in the business of doing these things, it would seem may be discouraged from doing anything more, and perhaps result in shortages of available space and capacity to do things. I'm just talking theoretically about that. I don't know if that's true or not, but that would be one thing. And secondly, that it would keep prices for things extraordinarily high or higher than they ought to be if there were more competition. And that was the big argument that was raised at the time. We're talking about the eye surgery center, for example.
Right, but I do think that I think this puts everybody on the same playing field, and it raises the threshold significantly. And if you look in the bill,
Yeah, I
more
see
than
that.
tripling some of the
And if you're
thresholds.
wanting to step back and look at the sort of the construct of certificate of need
Correct.
requirements.
As to whether that requirement is needed at all.
Oh, I see.
Maybe that could be the next stage in the iterative process.
I do think though that there is an argument for without it completely, there could be the creation of facilities that are as the chair said in her first, description of this, that are just there, like, once you build them, the facility has to use them to pay for them, and that in and of itself drives up the cost of healthcare. It's like,
There's an overcapacity and you still have to pay the bill. for
yeah,
it.
so it's like, oh, let's have more
But I
of
would
these
think
services in
that
order
the
to do that.
facility that is already here would mitigate against that by keeping their prices at the same point, and it's the new guy that will go out of business. And if he's not building that property with government funds, who cares? It's his problem.
Okay, I think it would be wonderful if you get a bill next year. That would give health and welfare something to work on, because that's definitely. Nothing should be taken for granted when we're looking at how we get the costs down in our healthcare system.
Well, competition typically does bring prices down, even if you have to invest in it. But the backup is the fact that the existing facility doesn't have to raise its prices to match that, the new entrant to the field.
We have to lower it. Be interesting to see what the Same Day Surgery Center has. NDI, and see if we can get that.
I don't think leaving it completely to the market, healthcare completely to the market is the answer.
Well, right now,
I mean, that's.
we are talking about
Just talking
this
about-
one and are trumping all over the jurisdiction of health and welfare.
Well, I mean, we haven't done a very good job of controlling costs in healthcare, to say the least. And the notion of trying a different approach would seem to at least be worth looking at. And I'm not saying do it. What I'm saying is really examine it carefully, which we haven't done in, I don't know, how many years.
Well, we're both in that committee, so
Yeah.
we can take another advisement. See if we can
Don't
get
some
it.
states do a market approach? There's for-profit hospitals all over the country.
Oh, yeah, we don't have any. Yeah, this,
We don't have any in Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we have the highest cost in the nation. That's not
well,
the only reason,
And
but we
that's-
do have
that's
among the
not-
highest healthcare costs in the nation.
It's not
we
because
do have a major hospital that has the highest healthcare costs.
And
World.
that just again raises the question is, should we not look at alternatives?
We'll look,
Yeah.
we'll look. Should we would you entertain a motion on this bill today?
I actually was asked to do that, but I usually let it hang over a day, and we've already got a motion, an amendment before third reading for the UCC bill, so I didn't want to push two bills in one day, and this is complicated enough so that I want to give some time. And I think, yes, I'm not even sure, we have the transportation bill, and I've been asked to get that out today, so it can go to appropriations, because they're trying to get the budget out by Friday, and they need the transportation bill and I think the construction bill, but they need all the major bills to do that. So that one, I'm gonna try and vote out today. Because normally there are 2 or 3 fees in there that are our jurisdiction and nothing particularly controversial, but we'll find out what's happening this year. But we've usually been able to get that out in a hurry. Any questions for Jen? Any issues if I put this on for a vote tomorrow? Okay, then we will put that on for vote tomorrow. Yeah, try to get these all out for the stage. Thank you, Jen. Okay, now Damien is not here. Awesome. Why is he here?
Joanne Unruh. Association of Special.
That's right. What's her last name?
Unruh.
But she's not there.
she's not, I don't know if she's the current one.
I don't think she is, but it's the Vermont Association of Special.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, that's.
Should I?
Take the hot seat, yeah.
But she must be a source because, when we went Act 173, we went from a fee for service and identification to census block grant.
Maybe we'll see.
She was part of that whole conversation. She has some knowledge of the probably.
They live in Montpelier.
Yeah, it might be worth bringing in.
Is the chair of the commission in that position for special education? Doesn't she do that now?
I'm sorry, who?
The chair of the commission, doesn't she? Do some?
No, she did the study.
Yeah.
One
Okay.
of the, whatever
sure.
the last study was on special.
The Vermont, there's the Vermont Council of Special Education Administrators.
That may be.
And the chair of that board is Pam Reed.
Correct.
And Erin McGuire is the past president, and Chris Benway.
Well, Megan Roy.
Megan Roy,
Superintendent.
she chaired the committee for the last major study that I think caused us to go to the block grant.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Megan, it was a microphone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Joanne was the executive director of the Vermont Council of Special Education Administrators.
okay,
that's what this is, that's what.
Yeah, so she's, yeah,
She's not anymore,
no,
but,
right, agree, yeah.
what was her husband's
Joanne's?
name? Yeah,
Oh, I don't know.
so Charlotte is
he was the
BCSEA.net.
required for
The
so
website,
retired from Social Security. Was the staff to,
but we can also add some of our witnesses today.
yeah, okay, right now we're going to transportation. Who says we aren't very here? No more healthcare hats. No more special education hats.
Actually, there is healthcare in here.
Oh. But that's not in our domain unless you're charging a fee.
Wait, are you interested? What's the bill
Okay,
number?
so Damien, can you give us the 2,000-foot version of this, and then we'll kind of hone in on.
Yeah.
But we have the app,
What's
pass
in our
by the house, not
domain?
app, but then we want the app.
Oh, you want the as proposed by the Senate?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Let me send that really quickly. I can even pull it up on the screen here. If
yes,
that's
that would
helpful.
be, yeah, because
Okay.
then everyone can see it, and if anyone's
Right.
watching it, all they can see it.
Join the meeting.
Yes.
Yes, it is a pretty nice day outside.
Senator McDonald was here today visiting. He used to take a folding chair and go out and sit on the steps some days like this. Vince actually moved a table outside and moved the institutions committee out.
The committee outside too.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you imagine trying to record with the Zoom microphone and how sensitive it is?
Oh my gosh, we
I
all.
think that,
Give ourselves a waiver from Zoom if we go outside.
yeah, I think that was before the tables were bolted to the floor. In good old days.
Yeah. Hear stories about that, but it's just so strange. to
I've
me.
heard they used to leave a window open at night so legislators could get back in the building after hours.
Oh,
And I have heard about the lounge under the appropriations room.
Heard stories about legislators in this building digging through waste baskets underneath the floor after looking for notes that were passed there.
Yeah.
That's just pretty serious.
We should do that.
sorry, I clicked on the wrong meeting invite. There we go. Now I'm coming into the Zoom. Sorry about that.
We're distracted. We'll be quiet.
No, it's okay. I had too many calendars open, so I hit the wrong box. Here we go. All right. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so this is the Committee on Transportation's amendment here, which is behind you on the screen. Or in front of some of you, I guess. The first section just adopts the transportation program, so this is not raising a fee or anything like that. This is our boilerplate language that adopts that big white book they give us every year with all of the proposed projects and the funding for them.
In the good old days, the legislature decided which roads got paved.
I've heard about that too.
I can remember when Senator Westman was Representative Westman and chaired transportation, and sitting here at midnight waiting to go home, and we had to settle the transportation before we could do it.
Yeah, we have heard some stories about those days and the ability to direct paving projects to your district. Just imagine.
Main Street, Montpelier want to look good.
So while we were working on this bill, one of the fourth grade classes from Union Elementary came in. It happened to be my daughter's class. They actually came in to visit the committee. And they pointed out a lot of paving that needs to happen in Montpelier.
So that we look for,
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
they aren't state roads.
As soon as they found out what it was, there were comments about that pothole in front of my condo complex, and
Try State Street.
I do every day. Anyway, section 2 is a technical correction to the rail program. It doesn't raise a fee. There was a typo in there that brought back subsidy that we are no longer doing for what's known as the Whacker, which is the railroad running through Barry, Berlin, and Montpelier. And if you go on the train ride at lunch on Thursday, you'll be going down that railroad.
That's right.
But the section 3 is language that was added around to require the agency to have an unobligated transportation fund balance entering next year and this is the amount that's necessary to cover what was in the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill in S46. And you'll remember S46 because that was in here as the tax break for loggers. Yes.
Wait, can you go over that again?
Yep.
That's the amount that would pay for S46.
S46 and the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill. Miscellaneous motor vehicle included waivers of fees for individuals transitioning out of foster care
That one.
and reduced license fees for folks on SSI. SSDI, those are the two big ones.
Huh.
And then there are some other potential fees in there.
The launching.
As you'll remember, your committee eliminated one of those, or really worked with DMV to eliminate one of those with the cancellation fees.
Yeah.
So by putting in the language that delays it, and then DMV making sure that people can no longer schedule 5 or 6 license test appointments. And so now the state can actually collect that fee. And it'll be a legitimate if you booked it and canceled instead of booking the week.
Okay, so this is the money that
Yeah.
they assume they are going to lose.
Right, and this is contingent on the House agreeing to everything, so this number.
Okay.
As we get closer to the finish line, this number will probably change in conference committee. Section 4 relates a little bit to fees because this is requiring updates twice in the coming year from transportation to the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee on state and federal funding. So as you may have heard, our revenues for the T fund were down in March. We've had some unexpected impacts on tourism in the state, and so that's affecting gas tax and diesel fuel tax. And depending on how things go in the next several months, those impacts could moderate or they could grow larger. And then with the federal funding, we are in a period of cautious optimism, I think. But there's still a lot of unknowns and a chance that certain grants that we're relying on for some of these programs are either modified or rescinded or delayed in ways that affects the program. So this just requires 2 briefings over the coming year to update on the status of that. And then also provides that if there's a significant change in state revenues or federal funding, that will impact the agency's ability to carry out a significant portion of the program, the secretary can request a meeting off this schedule within 14 days. And then finally, if there's a decrease of more than 4%, the secretary would have to submit a written report detailing how it's going to affect individual projects, which is similar to the report we do if there's a downturn in state funding already with the Joint Fiscal Committee. So this does overlap with your jurisdiction, although it doesn't necessarily impact the tax or a fee directly. Section 10G or Section 5 and Section 6 relate to what are called the 10G reports. So these are reports that are in the transportation program every year on where projects are in terms of delays, funding overruns, etc. And this is proposing to replace what is right now several pages of project by project listing with more of a holistic dashboard. So you can see, you know, we have 4 out of 40 projects are behind schedule. And then you can start asking questions if that number seems like it's trending up, etc., to start getting a better sense. Section 7 is relinquishing a portion of Vermont Route 36 in St. Albans. So the town is proposing to acquire this road from the state, and we have to provide authorization. So no taxes or fees there. Sections 8, 9, and 10 relate to rail trails. So we're updating language in that chapter, which used to be known as state acquisition of railroads. And now it's more holistically state-owned railroads and rail trails. The big change here is Section 10, which sets out certain activities that are prohibited in rail trail right-of-ways, such as littering, damaging plants, damaging structures or the surface of the rail trail, putting up signs that don't in a manner that's inconsistent with the policy. And this would be the same policy you have on state rights of way. So you're probably all familiar with this from campaign signs.
I can't put my campaign sign up on the rail trail.
Uh,
But I never thought about the bike
you,
path.
are a lot of your voters using the bike path?
I
Good
know,
question.
I have to remember that.
Yeah. And is it part of is it a state-owned right of way? That's the other question here, because
Still
there are
federal
plenty
money,
of,
though.
bike paths that are not state-owned.
Yeah,
Um,
that one isn't.
the selling goods and services, parades, demonstrations, big picnics, games, and it's important to note here, except at times and locations approved by the trail sponsor. So again, regulating the time, place of these things, but not necessarily saying, no, you can't do it, to avoid conflicts. Harassing and molesting wildlife except for fishing. And then using or discharging firearms or weapons or fireworks except as authorized by the trail sponsor or otherwise permitted by law. So this is one where it's not it is not prohibiting someone from, for example, carrying a firearm or using it in self-defense. It is otherwise prohibiting the use of firearms. It's also worth noting the original language had hunting and trapping. Those are already prohibited in the right of way under other laws. And so this is just sort of covering the use of firearms, weapons, or fireworks when it's not otherwise permitted. Igniting fires. soliciting alms or contributions, and use of motorized vehicles except for certain designated purposes, including accessibility.
is such an old fashioned way of saying that.
It is,
No banking.
but that was the language that was proposed and that the House passed, and your Senate Transportation Committee said, okay. So, and then overnight camping is the last one, except at designated areas. And then the penalties are, there's an existing civil penalty already of not more than $300, and this just continues that. The next two sections relate to the Transportation Board. The big change here is that we're providing authorization for the T-Board to appoint officers other than the chair. So governor appoints the members and the chair, and then they can appoint a vice chair, a secretary, etc. And then the other piece is clarifying who reviews what when there's a dispute related to an AOT contract.
We don't have junkyards anymore.
We don't have junkyards anymore. They are salvage yards. Green Mountain Transit Authority, you are all familiar with this discussion at this point, I'm guessing. It is our only transit authority that's chartered, so we actually have to amend their authority and statute. So what this is doing is it's consolidating their core area of operation to the urbanized area of Chittenden County, but then saying that they may operate service outside of that area with approval of the AOT, and that nothing in this section prevents other transit providers from running like commuter service or demand response service into that area with the approval of the agency. So this is really to provide flexibility as transit evolves in the state. The old language required services running to Washington County and Franklin County and so forth. And if that gets consolidated or shifted to other carriers, this will allow for that. The town highways language here, this affects the formulas for state aid for two new areas of town highway. One is structures, and the other is the Class 2 roadways program. Basically, what it's doing is it is tying those to inflation. So we are looking at growth in the T-fund appropriations or the CPI, whichever is less. And that matches up to our current general town highway funding aid formula. And so we're just making sure that these aren't staying fixed at their current base amounts, which are 8.6 and 7.2 million.
And does that money for the town highway, does that come out of the T fund?
It's T-fund money, yeah.
Okay.
So what it's doing is it's saying, look at the T-fund appropriations, with the exception of these three town highway formulas.
Mhm.
So we're looking at the way the growth in T-fund appropriations for everything else. And then we're making sure that these will follow that growth.
What if there's a downturn because?
So if the T-fund goes down, then these get frozen at the same as prior year. So basically freezing it. So it doesn't go down, but it won't go up either.
Okay.
And same thing if we had negative growth in the CPI, so that as unlikely as that is, if the CPI went down and the T fund was growing, it would still stay at zero. So whichever is less, and it's designed that way to protect the T fund from getting an increasing pull from the town highway aid in a way that would unbalance things. The idea is that this kind of keeps up with the T fund as time goes along. It's not a perfect mechanism, but it will allow for some growth without outstripping the T fund growth. And as you're all aware, gas tax and diesel tax are no longer growing and are looking like they're going to start trending down. They've been very flat and weak, and they're likely to start trending down as vehicle usage and vehicle efficiency continues to change in coming years. And so This is my way of saying preview of coming attractions. There's language in here to study a mileage-based user fee, or actually not study, but develop the mechanism to start collecting that, so that you start collecting. So the gas tax acts as a user fee for internal combustion engines. That's roughly equivalent to your use of the roads. Obviously, you're gonna pay less if you have a car that gets 45 miles a gallon than you would in a truck that gets 18 miles a gallon. So it's not perfect. The mileage-based user fee is designed to set up a charge for electric vehicles that are not buying gasoline. And then eventually, the proposal in here is to transition all vehicles over to that gradually as time goes on, so that everyone is paying on a usage basis for the road.
Would there be any kind of adjustment for the less fuel efficient kinds of vehicles?
So, that has been proposed and discussed in other bills. It's not part of the mileage-based user fee. The mileage-based user fee looks at the miles traveled. And for now, it is just going to roll out with electric vehicles
Right.
initially. And I'll get to that in a second. We'll spend more time on the language. Really digging into what they're proposing to model it on, because that is clearly a fee on usage that your committee will want to look at closely when it comes up.
But the bill also contemplates gas powered vehicles moving to that type of system.
It contemplates that eventually without a timeline on it.
Got it. Okay.
So it basically has intent language that this is an interim step towards shifting over to a mileage-based user fee for all vehicles at some point in the future. My expectation is that that would be a gradual multi-session transition. There are other proposals out there, but none of them are in this bill around how to deal with the softening revenues from gas and diesel tax, et cetera. I'm sure some of you have heard talk about various things like delivery fees and fees on rideshare companies. None of those are in this bill. Indexing the gas tax, that's also not in this bill. Those have all been discussed. There was a report that came out in January that looked at the potential to generate revenue and how fair that revenue generation would be and so forth. It's up on our legislative website. So if you do want some really good bedtime reading, it goes into the discussion of all of those things and gives you an overview of the options that you may be looking at in future years. All right. Section 15 is a report back requirement to clarify some language around what to do with state and federal funds that were provided for a local project that then gets canceled. Section 16 is one that may get into your committee's work more in the future. This is a look at, this is requiring the agency in consultation with the League of Cities and Towns and planning and development agencies to review how we assess the needs for municipal transportation and then fund that, and whether there's a better way to target funding for the highest need roads. So the example that we discussed frequently across the hall is Town Hill Road here in Montpelier. If you think of Town Hill Road, if Route 2 closes, Town Hill Road is where all of the traffic goes. So it becomes a crucial sort of regional road that affects multiple towns, as opposed to, unfortunately, East State Street, which is not as crucial a connector and artery, so it might have a lower priority in the future. But this will affect funding needs and then potentially revenue needed.
What page are you on?
I'm sorry, this is page 20.
Route 2 closed in Plainfield. We had a couple of other roads that became
Yeah.
major arteries.
I remember
Yeah.
trying to find my way on that detour right after it happened.
Yeah, like, see if I
You
can
need to
call.
be a realtor. We all know how to do that.
That's why when we were looking at a house here, we let the realtor drive. So.
I learned.
Yeah. So, section 17, is looking at finding efficiencies in municipal grant and, town highway aid programs. we have a lot of these programs and they overlap quite a bit. And so the question here is, could we realize some efficiencies that get more money put out the door for repairing bridges and paving roads and less money spent on trying to administer grants?
Okay, here we go. Mileage.
And now we're getting to the core of what you're interested in. So what we did in section 18 is we went back to the 2023 T-bill that created the mileage-based user fee language.
I was gonna say, we've been working on this for
Oh, yeah,
a
it dates
number
back
of years.
several years before that, we started
Yeah.
looking at it.
So when we're talking about transitioning to all motor vehicles, I'm not,
Sometime, maybe by the time I retire.
yeah,
So,
it'll be a while. And who
Yeah.
knows what the latest technology will be then? It may be the Jetsons. Somebody's got a flying car, doesn't fly very far, but it flies. 10 feet.
yeah, well, and then we've got airspace restrictions.
That's right.
Anyway, so where most of this is cleaning up in the intent language here to reflect what's happened since this was enacted. So we're pushing out the date to January 1, 2027, subject to sufficient funding for implementation, which reflects the current federal situation. And then we've reflected the electric vehicle infrastructure fee that you enacted last year, which didn't have a name yet. There's some other cleanup in here. We reflect fuel tax instead of gas tax because there's gas and diesel taxes. We're also looking at the fact that we're not collecting revenue from out-of-state plug-in electric vehicles that any out-of-state gas or diesel vehicle pays when they buy gas in the state. So is there a way to collect fees from them? That gets more complicated for a variety of reasons, but it's something for them to be considering. And then the last language here, and this is really key for this committee, is to not commence collecting the fee until the General Assembly has enacted legislation that establishes the amount and codifies any necessary authorizing language, and that legislation becomes effective. So,
does it include the percentage of electric vehicles, the 15% that's struck?
that is,
That got dropped last year.
no, it got struck in this. So July 1, 2025 this July was the original goal date, which was expected to be the first day when we reach 15% or more. That was dropped because we pushed it out to 2 years or a year and a half to January 1, 27 to reflect the funding issues.
But
and
there's no
delays in getting
threshold
started.
for the percentage of electric vehicles. And my understanding is we're at around 12% right now. So we thought we were gonna be at 15.
Yeah, the threshold is not in the language right now. That doesn't mean that when it comes back to you next year with proposed amounts, that you can't say, hey, we're only at 13%. We're gonna hold off on implementation.
Yeah, because I
So-
mean, right now, all incentives for buying electric vehicles are gone, so this seems like imposing a tax on a market that is not at a point where everyone agrees it's a mature market.
So, and I think there was a lot of discussion across the hall about the pros and cons of this in terms of encouraging electric vehicle ownership and so forth. The language, the threshold was left out. And the date was pushed out to January 1, 27. And then this language here to provide that the General Assembly would enact legislation establishing the amounts and codifying any necessary authorizing language. And that legislation would have become effective is added to sort of reflect some of the uncertainty, then discussions that need to happen. There were also questions raised about issues around like income sensitivity and so forth for folks who are in some of the lower income programs that provided additional incentives to get people into like a Nissan Leaf or a Chevy Bolt. And whether they should be bearing these fees too.
And does it get rid of the higher registration fees that we enacted last
That
year
would
as
be-
a part-time, temporary measure?
Those are repealed contingent on this taking effect.
Okay,
So those will remain in place until you enact the actual mileage-based user fee. Yeah, so it's really important to note, nothing in this bill actually enacts it or ties us to that date. Just like what happened this year where we bumped it out 18 months, you could bump it out again if you feel that the market's not mature enough. And ready to handle that fee. You could also structure the fee so that it phases in and gradually reaches a normal rate, a standard rate that it's going to stay at going forward, etc. So there are a lot of options that are going to be on the table when we come back in the second half of the biennium, assuming the federal funding comes through to do the work. And that is, I want to emphasize that is the big sort of question that's behind all of this, is that we have, as you'll see here on page 24, we've appropriated $700,000 in the past 2 fiscal years for the non-federal match. We are optimistic, or at least my understanding is that AOT is optimistic that the grant from the federal government is going to come through after the initial pause. But again, until that money is in our accounts.
Cash.
Yes, it's hard to guarantee that. So we put in a lot of sort of contingent language. And we know we'll be back here next year to say, what happened. And this is also part of that interim update on federal funding. If that grant gets held up or Congress repeals the authorization to fund those grants and the grant can't come out, then we may be back here next year saying we need to find money to do this or come up with a different approach.
The electric, given the chance that your Tesla is going to be set on fire or vandalized, and the unknown impact of tariffs on the cost of vehicles.
There's a
Who
lot.
knows what the market's going to do? I mean, it's
Right. There are a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
There's, even US produced cars like the Ford F-150 are projected to potentially increase by several $1,000s depending on how the tariffs are implemented, because so many of the parts in the car are made outside of the US borders. So there are a lot of unknowns that could affect the market, that could affect uptake, and that could affect your appetite to enact the mileage-based user fee in the short term. What this is doing is authorizing AOT to move forward with designing it and then coming back to you with the design and saying, this is what we would need to implement this. Here's a proposal for a rate, but of course, rate setting is the authority that lies in this room and then in your counterparts in Ways and Means. And then so there's a lot that would need to go on.
Yeah.
So a lot of this language here is just cleanup in the old section 29. The biggest changes here, and this would affect the rate charged, is that in the absence of a recorded odometer reading during a reporting period, AOT is proposing to charge a fee based on the 98th percentile of estimated annual vehicle miles traveled. So that's a pretty substantial hit if you tamper with your odometer or something like that, or don't report your mileage. It is. We actually have language in the motor vehicle bill on odometer tampering. So to clarify that and clean it up.
So if you're a person that drives the 100% out of 99, you wouldn't want to give your odometer.
There is. Yes.
Savings.
There is potential for savings there.
About 2%.
Yeah.
So
Is that you?
No. I don't have anything.
I don't even know how high this estimated 98th percentile of annual vehicle miles traveled would be. I imagine it's pretty high for most people.
Probably.
So,
One person will get a bill and we'll all hear about it and we'll come in and be volunteering it.
More serious question.
Yeah.
yeah,
In the talks across the hall there, was there any talk about getting rid of the fuel tax in lieu of a mileage-based user fee?
so it's in the intent language here.
Oh.
The idea is that eventually the fuel tax will,
We just talked about that, you guys.
yeah, so eventually the fuel tax will go away and the mileage-based user fee will take over. Is the intent.
Okay,
Um,
I like it.
I just think about the out of state. I just think about the out of state.
Okay. We're gonna have to
Well,
move
that-
this along because our next
Yeah.
people are.
I know, they're
finding
here,
out.
so, in any event,
So we're continuing out, we're pushing what we did last year out.
yeah, so the intent here is that the mileage-based user fee for a battery electric vehicle would be approximately equivalent to the average amount collected by the state in fuel tax revenue from the use of a non-plug-in electric vehicle car registered in Vermont, and the average amount collected in fuel tax and EV infrastructure fee from a plug-in hybrid, which pays a bit of both. And that it will be an interim step towards gradually expanding the user fee
This
to
is
all
what
motor
we
vehicles.
can.
Right, and this is,
Committee that we've, a commission we've just set up. Will be bringing back a final recommendation.
yeah, and AOT will be reporting back to us on September 30th and December 15th.
Okay.
So next section doesn't affect fees. It's using some of the funds that were previously appropriated for electrify your fleet, which has been underutilized, and using them to continue working with Drive Electric Vermont. And then section 22, 23, 24, and 25 adds some language around considering vehicle miles traveled and reductions in vehicle miles traveled when you're planning projects. This basically means is the simplest way to reduce vehicle miles traveled is to get people out of cars and onto public transportation or biking or walking or something like that. It doesn't mean that it has to be a priority. It's just considering that when developing planning.
Do we just reduce the area Green Mountain Transit does?
We provided flexibility for them to be reduced and for other transit agencies to take over.
There are other trans.
Yeah.
Tri-Valley Transit.
Yeah.
That's.
Section 26, this was the medical stuff. This is money to hire volunteer coordinators to get more volunteer drivers for non-emergency medical transports and other demand response transport programs. Section 27 is more language on that. Same with 28 and 29 and 30. So there was a lot of testimony that the committee took on the struggles to get drivers for folks who need to get to appointments. And so they're looking at recruiting more volunteers, better coordination so that you could maybe do fewer trips. So instead of having the same car go back and forth to the same place 4 or 5 times in a day, do 2 or 3 trips with multiple people in the car. Things like that.
We've heard the same testimony.
Yeah, we
Out
can-
out there about
we
the
can-
difficulties people are facing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But if they're sick.
That's a good point.
You gotta see.
Everybody passed up.
Okay,
All right, so section 31, this is language dealing with some issues that particularly manufacturers of ultra low volume vehicle manufacturing are dealing with. So these are manufacturers who might produce 6 cars a year. They're specialized, often sports cars or a modern version of an antique car. So it looks identical to the older car, but it's made with carbon fiber and a modern engine, et cetera, et cetera.
Good section right here.
Yeah, really, they had a car, kit cars too. So
was that
folks
what the
that,
car was out front?
yes,
All right.
it's one of 6 made in a year.
Okay.
And they just, So, kit cars and then home built motor vehicles, this is a whole,
Say, can we do it on a 3D printer yet?
we're getting close.
Um,
But anyway, this just requires Commissioner of DMV to work with Secretary of Natural Resources to look at ways to streamline registration and inspection for these cars. California already has a process, so they're likely to become a model for how to streamline sort of standardizing things for them so that they don't have to spend the 7 figures necessary to get EPA certified,
what is
things like that.
that why the A&R secretary is involved? Is it-
A&R covers emissions, so you have to have, California has an emissions provision. And I want to emphasize, this is not changing the law now. It is not waiving any emissions requirements. It's looking at a proposal to do that. California has figured out something, and as I think you all are aware, they have very strict emission standards. And they have figured out a way to move forward because they have several of these manufacturers. There are other states, I think, that have worked on this too, but this is just saying, figure out some options and come back to us. And hopefully they'll come back with their really neat cars and let us pick them for a spin.
Field trip.
So, railroad lease extensions here, section 32. This is leases for continued operation of railroads. This requires approval of the General Assembly for the lease for continued operation. Last year, we took away this approval. This year, we're putting it back in. We'll see what the House does with this, but this was a long discussion in the committee. It doesn't affect a tax or a fee. Dig safe, this is cleanup language. You guys are familiar with this. There were 2 sections that were inadvertently left out of the cleanup bill. This makes those changes, and it has a quicker path forward than the big bill. The last piece here is legal trails. As you may or may not be aware, there is an ongoing dispute over whether municipalities have the authority to maintain what are known as legal trails, which are public rights of way, discontinued town highways that are now in trail status and on the highway maps. This language would provide that right. As you may or may not know, that your transportation committee spent the entire morning discussing the bill on this issue and is expecting to do more discussion next Thursday or on Thursday. It's an ongoing issue with a lot of legal issues. This was added to put something in the bill here in case there's something that can move. But
There's a lawsuit, right?
yes, there's a pending lawsuit relating to 2 trails in Tunbridge. So, and that brings us to the end of the bill.
Okay,
So
the only thing we've got is
MBA, mileage based user fee, is the
mileage-based
biggest
user
piece.
fee, and all we're doing is pushing out the study committee for
You're
2 years.
basically pushing out the deadline because there's no way the agency would be able to meet the deadline of this July. They haven't even received the federal money yet.
Okay.
And so it'd be pushed out to January 1, 2027 to give them time to come back next session. And then allow at least 6 months prior to anticipated implementation for things to take effect and for people to be made aware. And like I said, there's the option for you to push it out further next year if you think it's not ready for prime.
Okay. Committee, any questions?
I move favorably H4.
We'll get it here. Logan,
Oh, okay, fine.
then you can move it.
Trying to move this along.
Logan, the no. The Logan's been sitting here, so also get.
All right. Sorry, Logan, I was trying to get them to forget you were here.
Then we're gonna go.
Where?
Rick and we are going on a voting bill out street.
So for the record, Logan Woodward, the Joint Fiscal Office, very brief fiscal note. There's only one section that actually has any fiscal impact. That is section 10, the use of rail trails. They set
a penalty, set the uses and the non-uses, and there's a penalty applied, so there might be some revenue generated from levy penalties, but it'll be largely de minimis. The other sections on this fiscal note are just more informational. They reflect the mileage-based user fee as we had the discussion, and some of the other sections that might be relevant to this committee and the appropriations committee. But as far as fiscal impact, it's de minimis of this with only the section 10.
So if somebody violates the rules and gets hit with a penalty,
Yep.
might.
So
unless we
up
have
to
a lot of
$300.
really bad rule breakers,
Yep.
it's de minimis.
Correct.
Okay. Senator,
I would move H488 favorably, as presented to us from the Senate Transportation.
okay. Oh, I gotta remember the clerk's gotta do this.
What, can I ask the question before
Yep.
we do that? You said, so the rail trail penalty, if you light a fire or something like that, ask for alms, in your pleasure car. It's $300, is that?
Up to $300, I
Up.
believe, and that is an existing penalty within statute. It just makes reference to
Okay,
that.
because it's not in your fiscal note what it is.
So the last sentence there, would be subject to civil penalty pursuant to 5 VSA 3408 C, provision 3. That is the penalty that it would.
Okay.
It's limited.
No,
I have
not
a
unless
question on
they
that.
have permission.
On that subject, is who sets the fees and how do they set them?
That is a great question that I don't know the answer to.
And this is a penalty.
Who sets
Yeah,
it?
this is the penalty for violating the.
Okay, we're gonna be
Rule
about
the trial.
5 minutes. If you might find more chairs, in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Soon as we
Oh.
finish access.
Yeah,
what
so
we did.
the civil penalty in there is already existing and already charged for a violation of rules adopted by the agency in relation to the use of rail trails. And what we've done is we've just added a cross-reference back to that for the new section that lays out further guidance on the usage of rail trails, which the agency was asking for because they've been formalizing their rules and guidance around.
I'm just curious, who sets it? Do they write a ticket? Who does this?
Michelle, do you know the?
In terms of enforcement,
Yeah.
Senator, for the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. So the enforcement of this, would, depending on the action, it would be either a law enforcement officer, a DMV official, a game warden. I don't think our staff wouldn't be,
I'm just curious if anybody's ever assessed any fees, if we don't really
assessed
understand how it's done.
It's a fine, that's not a fee.
Fine,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I think we have had instances of folks riding ATVs on trails where we've brought in law enforcement, and I don't know specifically whether tickets were issued, but this is a similar nature.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have any further discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Senator Chicken,
Yes.
Senator Brock,
Yes.
Senator Hewlett,
Yes.
Senator Beck,
Yes.
Senator Hardy,
Yes.
Senator Meadows, yes, Senator Cummings,
Yes,
7-0.
700. Okay,
We can do it as well.
Senator Chittenden will report that unless somebody else wants. to.
I was on transportation for 4 years, happy to, but if somebody else wants it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
No, I think that's a great choice. Yes. Really good choice.
There's gonna be some inequity going on here. All right,
Yeah,
we're going to move on because the next group is
I
arriving.
don't report any bill.
Just tough stuff.
We're going to move on to H206, Universal Commercial Code, everybody's favorite
Sorry about that. Sorry.
subject.
Rick, good to see you again.
Yes.
Okay,
Rick Sag, Office of Legislative Counsel. You thought you were done with the UCC?
No, I didn't.
He hit me this morning with an amendment or yesterday, I did not email him. But, I thought the committee should see it, so I didn't hit you with a big surprise. This is bigger than adding an S, which was health and welfare last week.
It's slightly more.
Slightly more important.
So yesterday or Monday, I was reading through the bill, final check of the bill. And I noticed a couple of things that I missed. So these are technical in nature, but I want to make sure you all are aware of what we're doing here. There's two proposed amendments here. These are all from me. And I have run these through Carl Lisman. He's okay with these. I think he complimented me, in which I said, I should have caught this in the House. So don't give me too many compliments. Anyway, the first amendment is, and both of these are in the second to last section, section 11, the transition part of the bill, where, this is effective July 1st, 2025, but you have a lot of transactions that have already occurred, right, before that date. And with these big commercial transactions, sometimes you have this security that is existing. And when this law passes, you kind of have to deal with that existing security. That's the security interest and how to deal with that. So long story short, the two proposed amendments is adding the word before, and I'll show you where this goes. The second one is striking out July 1st, 2025. So we go to the bill, B1A is here where I get section 11. This is just session law, but it's important, session law. So you have saving clause and exceptions, except as provided in subsections C through G of the section. A transaction validly entered into July 1st, 2025. That's not right. That should be before July 1st, 2025. If we did not have before there, that would be a really, I would hope that a court would entertain that this is model law and this is, the word before should be there. That's the issue. So that's the first amendment, is adding the word before in between into and July. The second amendment is in D2, same section, striking out July 1st, 2025. Okay, security interest unperfected before effective date. A security interest that is enforceable immediately before July 1st, 2025, but is unperfected at the time. One remains an enforceable security interest until the adjustment date, which, by the way, the adjustment date is defined as July 1st, 2026. That'll make more sense here in a second. Two, remains enforceable thereafter if the security interest becomes enforceable under section 9203 of the UCC as amended by this act on July 1st, 2025, or before the adjustment date. So I read this and I said, that doesn't really make sense, because the adjustment date is July 1st, 2026. Why wouldn't you just pick one of those days? Why are we giving two different, very, very different dates? So the amendment strikes July 1st, 2025. So it would say, as amended by this act, comma, on or before the adjustment date, which is July 1st, 2026. And again, I ran these by Carl, and he agrees with the V changes.
Great, and that's gonna be as clear to everybody as it is.
No, I'm sure, Madam Chair, you can say it very eloquently in the floor.
I will read it very well. Okay, committee, any questions? I'm gonna offer that tomorrow, and I think I need a clean copy to take upstairs.
Sure.
And I will do this and say the committee has heard it, and I'm not hearing any objections. So we'll go for it tomorrow,
So just your name on it, just your amendment.
unless everybody else wants to be on it. You wanna be on it, Senator Brock, or Guy? Anybody object having your name on it?
No.
Okay,
Makes sense.
everybody's name's on it.
More
Senator Mattis?
more work, yeah.
Oh, yeah, now I have to add names. And I have to change senator to senators. That's another thing. So I'll send you draft 1.2, which will have all your
Okay.
names.
So.
That will
Senator
work.
Gulick, is that a yes?
Yeah,
Okay.
she can't wait to be on it.
Yeah,
Senator Chittenden, you're a yes?
okay, all right.
Okay, that's
Thank you.
easy.
I apologize for bringing it back, but yes, you go.
Yeah, now, I don't know. We have, we're over 10 minutes behind. But I would like to take maybe a 5-minute break because I think this next session is going to be a little long.
Events.
So we will take a 5-minute break while we change